Hello and welcome to this segment of the Play Weekly live show. I'm Adam Burt and I'm joined now by Dan Thomas. Dan, how's it going?
Very good, thank you, Adam. And yourself?
I'm not too bad, thank you. We're here today to talk about game dev in the cloud, and I guess one of the inspiring stories that inspired this discussion in the first place is about Unity this week. If you're not aware, Unity, the company behind the popular game engine of the same name, have this week announced plans to acquire Parsec, which is a remote desktop tool for devs and creatives. You can also play games on it if you want, for 320 million US dollars in cash. This is Unity's biggest acquisition to date, and we thought it was interesting. And Dan has been doing some thinking and some research about game development in 2021 in the cloud specifically. You know, remote working is such a hot topic at the minute as we begin to hopefully emerge from the pandemic, but still have a sort of hybrid approach to working. So we thought we'd get Dan on the show and we'd have a little chat about game dev in the cloud. Dan, what is game dev in the cloud for those who don't know?
So, yes, you mentioned the pandemic, and it's fair to say that has had an impact on the way a lot of us work, particularly office-based people. And whilst we've all had challenges, we've all had to make changes to the way we work, changes to our IT setups, and so on and so forth. I think the impact it's had on game development studios has been significant. So whilst, say, for example, for us, we were what we'd like to say kind of remote enabled or remote friendly before. So it was as simple as pick up our laptops and go and do what we do from home. Albeit that may be oversimplifying it somewhat, but that's essentially what we did. For game studios, there's a few more complexities to that. So we've mentioned this on the show before, but things like getting builds of a game. We know games like the latest Call of Duty, Red Dead Redemption 2, some of the sort of reaching the hundreds of gigabytes. And for people like in QA roles, for example, you need to test the latest build. You've got to get a 100 gigabyte install onto your machine to do your testing. And when you send your army of developers and testers and everybody else involved home onto their home grade internet connections, that can be a challenge. Game development and playing games often requires beastie hardware. So these huge graphics cards and desktops and things, again, logistically very cumbersome and very challenging. There's also issues around things like licensing. So a lot of game development software relies on server-based licenses that rely on computers being physically connected to the local network to even allow the software to run. Things like this. All sorts of challenges that perhaps we don't appreciate as sort of those not so closely tied to the game development process. So when the pandemic happened, I kind of did my digging, was like asking people what are the challenges, and this is why I know about these things. And also around this time, kind of Parsec was coming onto the radar. So I've been curious and thinking about it. And I think there's potentially a lot of interesting solutions around this idea of game production in the cloud. So Parsec, for those that don't know, it's essentially it's a streaming tool that streams a desktop to a lightweight browser, not dissimilar to how we've got things like the xCloud service from Game Pass, where you can play games on mobile devices just in a web browser. You can use a tool like Parsec to kind of replicate that kind of experience. So we can have a high-powered machine in one location, and you can essentially use it on even on mobile devices. So that enables this idea of the cloud-based game production, and cloud service providers, the likes of Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, and various others. They're also starting to get their heads around GPU, cloud-based GPUs. So that's historically not been so prolific. So you can do your remote desktop onto a virtual machine in the cloud previously, but as soon as you came to do anything perhaps a little bit more visually intensive, high frame rate, high graphic fidelity, that was when it would perhaps not be such a great experience. Fine for editing a Word document or changing a few server settings, but like a 3D application or testing a game wasn't really viable until tools like Parsec came along and cloud GPUs enabled that to scale. So what we now have is the facility to create essentially a replication of your previously studio-based infrastructure, so high-powered GPU machines in the cloud, and then your users can leverage that on lower-powered devices anywhere in the world. And yeah, I think that's a really powerful concept, potentially really strong opportunity for the evolution of the modern game studio and traditional businesses as well, to kind of decouple the context of where you work from the infrastructure and setup that you have. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense, yeah. And if anyone at home is wondering about how Parsec works and whether it really can do the things it says it can do, you can get Parsec. If you go and look for it for free, you can use it as an individual, and they do encourage people to use it for co-op gaming in games that don't offer traditional co-op. Maybe if you've got like a couch co-op game, you can play it over the internet with something like Parsec. So you can test it in your own way, and I guess the big thing, and you kind of hinted at this in terms of the way that technology has advanced over the last 18 months, but also recent years, is just about the lack of compromise there. So, like you say, historically, remote desktop control, you could do it, but it wasn't a sort of experience that you would want to do on a regular basis. It would be like, if we have to, I could use a really slow, clunky interface to control your mouse from here, for example. But Parsec's pitch and their competitors has been, well, we've moved on since then. You could do that, and you could almost be indistinguishable from your own desktop if the software and the machines behind it are good enough. It could be like having that high-powered machine in front of you, even though it's obviously not. It's thousands of miles away, probably in an oil rig under the sea, knowing Microsoft or someone like that.
Absolutely, yeah, and we're seeing like you can achieve kind of 60 FPS, 1080p, 4K even in some instances. And yeah, there are a lot of mitigating factors, and for like real fast first-person shooter type gameplay, it's maybe not the perfect experience yet. But for game development, game production, a lot of those scenarios are well catered for, and it also overcomes a lot of other barriers. So your virtual desktop is sat, as you said, kind of in a cloud-based data center. It can be extremely powerful. It's got an incredible connection speed, so and an extremely reliable connection as well. So even if your home connection is unstable, your work environment is going to be on this highly robust. So if you are, you're still going to have to rely on source control, checking files in and out, but you can do all of that in the virtual network, which will be at extremely high speeds. And as we know, the cloud does extend around the globe. So your virtual offices, or your real offices or your real workforce can work more seamlessly around the world and following the time zones and things like that. You could literally be, say, working on a scene, and then finish your day up, and then the person in the next studio around in the next time zone, they can literally pick up and carry on where you left off without needing to save the files, send them across, check them in, or anything like that. They can literally take over from where you left off, which I think is really interesting. There's been a lot of issues with, like I mentioned, home grade internet connections. We've all got, many people will have bandwidth or data transfer limits, things like that. And if you are dealing with gigs and gigs, or terabytes and terabytes of data that that's quickly consumed, this is no different to streaming a Netflix movie. Really, it's just it's sending you the visual data only and not doing the processing, not actually moving the files down.
Yeah.
Really a lot of potential with that, and I know the cloud service providers, Microsoft particularly, they're investing in this and exploring this. Obviously, we're now seeing Unity taking an interest, and Parsec is positioned but as a game playing tool as well as an IT and infrastructure tool. So that's really interesting to see Unity getting into that. We've seen Unreal investing in production and sort of the game kind of ecosystem, not just the consumer side of things. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Unreal coming out with something at some point. It's a very, very interesting and sort of rapidly evolving space that's been absolutely hurried along by the pandemic.
Yeah, we actually talked on last week on the show. We talked about Microsoft opening a new branch of their Azure gaming division here in the UK. They've recognised that the UK is a centre for potential growth in games. They have a lot of belief in the studios and developers who live in the UK, and their mission is to Obviously, there's a variety of things that Microsoft offer, but one of the key things is this Azure support, the idea of offloading computational stuff, whether that's in the game itself or this kind of co-working environment. So it'll be interesting to see how that maybe impacts the industry locally over the next few years. I wanted to just underscore something as well about the file sizes. Like you talked about how big games can be, and that is really, really worth highlighting, because people know that games are big. Like, if you've got Call of Duty or Destiny 2 or Red Dead Redemption, like one of these games that is massive. Obviously, there's maybe you could ask how well have they optimized it, but that is optimized. That is not the full size of the files that they're working with. That's not the raw files of the game. So you think about how big that is, how much of your hard drive it takes up, how long it takes you to download an update when there's a 40 gig patch. That's the kind of challenges we're talking about dealing with, because you could have to download several versions of that a day potentially, and they could be unoptimized and they could be twice as big as that.
And games are not getting any smaller. They're only going to get bigger. The worlds are getting bigger. The fidelity is getting higher. It's absolutely going to be an increasing challenge. And it's not just development either. I actually kind of did a very crude version of this when we had to run the Guildford Games Festival last year remotely, where we would have previously had an in-person event, so we decided we would stream this. And we didn't want to rely on, again, my home internet connection for this. We also were streaming to multiple platforms. We were streaming to Steam and to Twitch. And so I set up a virtual environment in the cloud to stream the content from. So even if I got disconnected, things like the pre-recorded video and things like that, they could be dual streamed on these extremely high connectivity virtual machines, and it was just a much more robust approach for doing that, rather than just relying on my laptop and my home internet connection that we all know are not the most reliable. And even if you do pay for the premium services, you're at the mercy of the builder up the road cutting through the line. So there's lots of applications for this beyond just games playing or games development. It extends to the whole ecosystem. Yeah,
and we've seen a lot of delays over the last 18 months plus from studios who have struggled in various ways to adjust to the pandemic and adjust to maybe new ways of working from home. But there are studios out there who are making a success of this. Obviously, games have shipped in the last 18 months, and there are also studios out there who are remote studios anyway. They were remote even before COVID-19 was headline news. I know that one studio in particular that you really appreciated in terms of what they put out was the Ori games and the studio behind those.
Moon Studios, yeah, they've been remote and producing some really good quality games for sure. And it's interesting now, kind of seeing the next level of the really large studios and how they've managed. And it'll be interesting. They mentioned kind of some of the Microsoft technologies. I've seen some of they've even kind of been using some of the cloud computational capabilities to automate some of the more repetitive kind of testing processes and things. So you can just have an army of machines in the cloud testing your game, testing every scenario, and it's just incredible, very exciting. Really keen to see sort of how this all pans out, but definitely an area worth taking a look at if you are setting up a studio or looking to evolve your studio. Consider what it might look like in a cloud-based environment.
Cool. Well, thanks very much, Dan.
Thank you.
And we're going to... Sorry, go ahead. Finish what you're going to say.
Just letting me talk all nerdy about cloud and game production. That's my element, so I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate it, and we're going to throw back to the studio to continue the rest of the show. See you again.
Thank you.